during exam season, my father came to give me an ultimatum. This can't go on like this. We're losing a lot of money because of you. Do you want to end up like your Uncle Albert, who studied until he lost his mind and now lives in a filthy apartment on the outskirts? I didn't say I wanted to stop working with you. I can do both at the same time. No, clearly you can't, and you'll have to choose. Either continue working with us where you belong and quit school, or continue in that stupid pursuit of knowledge and say goodbye to this family forever. Hi, my name is Jem. My family was always, in monetary terms, what could be considered humble people. We didn't possess much, but what little we had was enough to lead a decent existence without having to endure deprivation. My parents had a small fast food business. They had an old van that they used to drive around the city daily, looking for potential customers. Since they didn't have their own establishment to sell their hamburgers, the back of that vehicle served as a kitchen, where my mother used to prepare the food that would later be sold. With my father at the wheel, in charge of public relations, as he liked to call them, and my mother at the stove, one could say that the business was completely family-run. Not only did they strive to make it succeed, but from a very young age, they insisted that my brother George and I participate in the business. Come on, Jem, put in a bit more effort or you won't amount to anything. I didn't raise a lazy person, and it seems like you're about to fall asleep in front of the frying pan. If you burn yourself, I'm not going to treat you. Sorry. I have an exam today, so I stayed up studying late last night.
And why didn't you study earlier? What a lack of discipline. That's why you're not performing well in school or at work.
Yesterday, I didn't have time until after dinner. Don't you remember I told you? As soon as I got back from school, you sent me to run some errands. And then when I came back, I had to take care of sales in the van. It was your turn. And no, I don't want to hear another word, or you'll go without pay this month. The pay I received was actually miserable, barely $50 a month, which I couldn't even spend on treats, but had to reserve for buying school supplies. My parents didn't believe in the current education system, arguing that beyond learning to read and count, it wasn't good for much else. That's why they never contributed a cent to it. If I needed something for school, I had to buy it with my own money. Then, regarding the work my parents forced us to do, it changed over the years. At the beginning, when we were too young to be trusted with preparing the hamburgers, we exclusively distributed flyers at traffic lights, encouraging people to visit our business. Later, as we grew up, we were assigned tasks such as cleaning, purchasing required ingredients, customer service, and even cooking. It got to the point where, excluding the hours we spent at school, we dedicated the rest of the day to the business. George seemed satisfied. I wasn't. I was convinced that if it weren't for the government making it mandatory for us to go to school, my father would have us working for him all day long. Wouldn't you like to leave this? Why? It's guaranteed work, and anyway, what do you need what they teach you in school for? Our parents would never let you go to college anyway. No, but at least finishing high school would be nice. Be careful with what you're doing. Our parents are already suspicious because you're spending too much time buried in books and not paying enough attention to work as you should. I wanted to protest, but I realized George was right. I didn't dislike the family business, although I'd be lying if I said I wanted to spend my whole life in it. I wasn't going to give up my studies, no matter how consuming they were. Unfortunately, George wasn't far off with his warnings, and a couple of weeks later, during exam season, my father came to give me an ultimatum. This can't go on like this. We're losing a lot of money because of you. Do you want to end up like your Uncle Albert, who studied until he lost his mind and now lives in a filthy apartment on the outskirts? I didn't say I wanted to stop working with you. I can do both at the same time. No, clearly you can't, and you'll have to choose. Either continue working with us where you belong and quit school, or continue in that stupid pursuit of knowledge and say goodbye to this family forever. I thought he was joking, that he wouldn't actually kick me out for continuing to go to school, but my father was dead serious, and my mother supported him. At first, I decided to give in, pretend I agreed with them, and put more effort into work without completely abandoning my studies. But as soon as I finished compulsory schooling, it became clear that my parents didn't buy my little act. Repeating the threats my father once said to me, they didn't wait to hear my opinion before throwing me out onto the streets with the few possessions I had. I was 14 at the time and didn't know where to go. The only relative who lived nearby and whom I knew was Uncle Albert, about whom my parents always made disparaging remarks and told unsavory stories. Frankly, I was a bit scared of him because of what I'd heard. But what other option did I have than to show up at his door and hope for the best? They've kicked you out? They can't do that. They say I'm worthless if I can't work, that they would be losing money. And in a way, I think they're right. Since George and I joined the business, they've been able to relax more, taking more breaks. This is absolutely deplorable. Come, you can stay at my house, no problem. It turned out Uncle Albert wasn't the crazy person I was led to believe. On the contrary, he was incredibly kind and grounded. He sympathized with me from the get-go when I told him my story, arguing that what my parents had been doing to me was abuse, and that I should never have been given the option to leave school at such a young age. In the end, not only did my uncle permanently take me into his home, but he also allowed me to continue attending high school without any conditions attached. Uncle Albert wasn't rich, but he wasn't as poor as my parents claimed either. He lived in a modest apartment, yes, but it was cleaner and tidier than my own home. Here, I could have a room to myself, instead of sharing one with George, and far from urging me to find something more productive to do with my time, Uncle Albert always encouraged me to study and aim high. After all, he had been a university professor before retiring, so he was an academic and knew perfectly well what he was saying when he encouraged me. Years later.
Hey, Jem, did you know there are some people in a van bad-mouthing you to whoever listens? I think it's your parents.
That can't be. I haven't been with them for years. What are they doing?
They're saying they have an ungrateful son. That sheer luck has kept you from ending up dead in a ditch, but your time will come. They even insinuated that you're involved in drugs or some other shady business.
I haven't even contacted them in years. I hadn't contacted them, but they knew I was with Uncle Albert because he called them the first night I was at his house, 5 years ago, to let them know. A mere courtesy, just so they wouldn't worry about me anymore, if they ever had. Now that I found out they had been bad-mouthing me behind my back, and probably still were, it made my blood boil. I wanted to pay them back somehow, and I found a way to carry out my little revenge, which would escalate in a way I never imagined. Could you lend me the graffiti spray cans that you and your friends usually use for your paintings? I'll pay you for it. Just name a price. Are you sure? If the police catch you, we didn't give you anything. Don't worry, they won't catch me. And they didn't catch me. Having traveled so much around the city in those years when I worked as a slave for my parents, I knew the streets well and knew their blind spots, where there were no security cameras to betray me. One night, while everyone was asleep, I made a graffiti on my parents' van, calling them thieves and accusing them of selling harmful products for health. Truth be told, I didn't know to what extent the fast food they sold was fit for human consumption. Originally, I was only going to write thieves in big letters on the side of the van, but once I started doing it, I thought, what if? Because such a random insult would only provoke laughter from the neighbors. If I accused them of something, besides humiliating them, it would also leave the neighbors wondering, so I filed a complaint about the business accusing them of poor hygiene under a fake name. So that's what I did, expanding my revenge. And I must say it worked perfectly. As I did the graffiti on the side where my relatives didn't get into the van, and it was still very dark when they started using it the next day, they never realized that someone had vandalized it until many hours later, having already driven through half the city, to the astonishment of the neighbors, when the police stopped them. Jem, did you know your parents are in custody? How? It's only temporary, while they investigate. But it seems someone accused them of selling food in poor condition, and the authorities started investigating. Your parents didn't have permission to have that business. They never got it. The place where they cook doesn't meet health standards, and it's very likely that they'll get a fine of thousands of dollars. Apart from having to close the fast food business, of course. I couldn't believe it. How had my plan worked out so well? Not only did my parents end up ruined, having to sell the van and much of their possessions to pay that fine imposed by the government, but it turned out that Uncle Albert had more money than they thought, and since I lived with him for many years, he decided to leave me his entire inheritance when he passed away, and I was rich. I managed to send George money whenever he needs it, but nothing for my parents. In the end, my parents ended up on the streets, without a single dollar from that supposed family business that was supposed to lift us out of poverty. And I, for my part, could continue studying, enroll in a university, and eventually get a good job, thanks to the unconditional support I received from my uncle. Thanks for watching. please subscribe.